Talk. Talk. Talk to me Tuesday. Welcome to Talk to Me Tuesday on a Tuesday. I'm your host, Madi B. And today, yet again, we have another special show. We will be deep diving today on what is speech therapy and when is speech therapy needed. There are many that have had delays in speech or life triggers that cause speech interruption, and even an accident that may have caused one's speech to suffer. So today we actually have the honor to welcome Meera Deters with Super Speech Solutions. Welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here today.
We are super excited to have you on the show today. And look, we're excited to deep dive and be transparent on what you do and what speech therapy really means and who could take advantage of that. So look, you help a lot of people, and we're very happy to have you on the show to talk about it. So as we get started, let's just get to know you a little bit, Meera. So tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey that got you to where you are now.
Sure. So crazily enough, I've been a speech therapist for 14 years. It's gone by really fast. It's hard to believe it's already been that long. The reason I decided to go into speech therapy, to be honest, I didn't even ever know what it was. My dad had been working as a radiologist at the hospital here locally in Houston, and he told me about speech therapy. So radiologists at the hospital actually do swallow studies. They do an X-ray study with speech therapists to see if someone has trouble with swallowing. So my dad said, hey, why don't you come to the hospital and see what speech therapists, occupational therapists, and physical therapists all do? Because I really didn't know what any of them did. And so I actually spent, I think this was after high school, I spent 2 weeks at the hospital. This was Herman Hospital. And I observed all 3 different types of therapy. But I'm telling you, the second I saw what a speech therapist does, I thought, wow, I want to be that person helping with communication. I just think it's such a powerful thing to be able to help with.
Yeah, I think it is. And look, your communication and your speech is awesome too. So I want to kind of highlight on that and what you work on and talk a little bit about what a speech therapist does.
Yeah, so I think a lot of people really don't know everything that a speech therapist can do, but the best way I like to describe it is from the neck up. And I would categorize it into 3 different areas. So the first area that we help with is communication, which I think a lot of people know and hear about. But even within communication, there are a couple different areas. So the first one is the area of speech. And speech is just how you sound when you're talking. So oftentimes, if someone has difficulty pronouncing a certain sound, we might not understand everything they're saying. So for example, with children, a lot of them have trouble pronouncing the R sound. That's one of the later developing sounds. So they may, substitute a different sound for R. So that's one area. Another area is the area of language. So that could be having trouble following directions. It could be having trouble answering questions, or it could be having trouble using verbal language. So maybe someone is not able to use a whole sentence. Maybe they only use 1 word or 2 words together. So how they express themselves. Then there's also the area of fluency, which is also commonly known as stuttering. And so, of course, we can help people who stutter, and that's a whole separate area by itself as well. Then there's also the area of feeding and swallowing. Now, that's a really interesting area that I feel like a lot of people don't know that we can help with, but there are a couple of things we can do in that particular area. So one of the areas, and I'll be talking about it later, that I specialize in is autism, specifically working with children who have autism. So children who have autism or autistic children oftentimes are picky eaters, which I like to call food explorers. I heard that term recently somewhere. I really like that term. And so they might, have trouble with eating in terms of they may only eat foods that are orange, or they may only eat foods that, feel a certain way. Maybe they only like a crunchy texture. Maybe they only like I said, foods of a certain color, certain texture. They may only, they have to like how something looks. So that can be lots of different things. Usually it means they have some kind of sensory issues going on that affect their diet. Or it could be someone who's had a traumatic brain injury or stroke or dementia or Alzheimer's, and maybe they have difficulty swallowing. And so then we can be consulted to see what kind of diet they need to be on. And like I mentioned, the X-ray swallow study can be done in conjunction with the radiologist if we think that the liquid or food is going into their lungs, which is commonly known as aspiration. So we want to make sure that's not happening. So we might recommend, we might ask an MD or a doctor to write an order for that so that we can see what's actually going on, and then recommend strategies that will help, or recommend a different diet, different modified texture. And the last area we help with is the area of thinking. So we'll be diving more deeply into that in a little bit later. But that's the area of cognition or thinking, can involve a lot of different things. But if someone has had a traumatic brain injury or stroke, they may have difficulty with their memory. So we might be helping them with short-term memory strategies, or we might be helping with what's called executive functioning. So that can be a lot of different things, but commonly that could be problem solving, or it could be organization, or sometimes it could be the area of social skills. Oftentimes when someone has an injury to the front of their brain or the frontal lobe, it involves a lot, including changes to their personality. So there are a lot of different things that we can help with overall, but that's pretty much the summary.
That's a good summary, and that was a lot of good information. Look, I definitely commend you and respect what you do, which from all levels, like you just said, the neck and up is a great way to determine like different types of levels that you work with. Now, one of the questions I do want to ask, you named 5, it's probably a little bit more, but do they sometimes go hand in hand with each other?
Yes, they definitely can. So an example of that would be, and like I mentioned, I specialize in working with autistic children. An example of that would be sometimes the autistic child I might be working with might have difficulty with expressing themselves. So that would fall under language, but they might also have difficulty with their speech. So we might be working on certain sounds to have them improve, how well they're understood. And we might also be working on the area of feeding. So you might be trying to get them used to more different textures, more different types of food as well. So that's just one example, but definitely there can be more than one area that you're working on in speech therapy, of course, depending on the individual client.
And look, like you said earlier, we are going to dive deeper into some of these things that you kind of mentioned. Another good question that I have, because you did mention swallowing, right? And and that's very close to the ears, to the brain area. So do the ears, if someone is not able to hear as well, could that also have an effect on the speech therapy that you're experiencing, that they're having?
Yes, definitely. So especially with children, if they have trouble with hearing, oftentimes they have delayed speech or delayed language. So if children have a lot of, they have a history of having trouble with hearing to where they got, the PE tubes inserted, oftentimes they have trouble with talking because they they can't hear everything clearly. If they can't hear everything clearly, it's going to come out different than it should. So definitely, a lot of times we may recommend that a child, or sometimes even an adult, gets a hearing test done so that we can rule out that hearing loss is not the cause of the problem.
Wow, those are great points. And I do have some comments here. I have Renee saying good evening. I have Michelle saying hi. And then I have Adam saying very important information. Thank you for sharing, Meera. I agree that we're really, and I want to thank you guys for watching right now too, but look, we're going to go in a little bit deeper. You did mention a little bit that you specialize with autism, and yes. I just want to highlight all the areas that you specialize in for those that are watching that may be able to benefit.
Sure. So in terms of the areas I specialize in, there are 3 different areas I specialize in. So the first one, like you mentioned, is working with autistic children or children who have autism. I say both because I know people have different preference on how they want to be addressed, so I'm using both. I also specialize in working with children who are classified as late talkers. So those would be children who are not talking when they should be, or children who have difficulty with, like I mentioned before, understanding language. They might have trouble following directions, or children who have trouble expressing themselves. Maybe they're not putting all the words together to form a sentence yet, or maybe they're not even using words yet. And so maybe we're starting with, the sign of more or all done. Maybe we're starting, with gestures or pointing even. So that could be a lot of different things. And lastly, another area that I specialize in, which is also a really interesting area too, is called accent modification or accent reduction. And that usually is an elective service that adults will seek me out for. And that is typically, to give you an example of someone who might seek me out for that, that's generally a very high performing adult, someone who's very smart. They're in some kind of international job. They might be, let's say, for example, last client I worked with is in the oil and gas field. And so he was seeing me because he felt like the way that he was talking or the way that he pronounces words and sounds was actually holding him back from going higher up in the company. He was already pretty high up. I think he was vice president at the time, but he thought that his accent, or like I said, the way he talks or speaks, was actually holding him back from going even further up the corporate ladder. And so I did work with him for a couple of sessions, but that's an example. And sometimes, these adult clients might feel like that's also holding them back socially as well.
Wow, those are great points that you're bringing up. And one thing that you mentioned is the little ones, right? A delay in their speech. So for those that are watching right now that have little ones, in your opinion, Meera, what age should kids start talking? Do you have those statistics? So
I do. Yes, I do.
A parent can recognize, hey, they are delayed.
Yes. So they're very important milestones for speech and language. That's something really important to talk about, actually, especially for any parents who are watching, which I'm sure there are probably many parents watching. So the first one I would say is that if your child is not using words by the time they're 1 to 1.5, because there can be a little bit of a range, then that's already a good time to refer. Definitely, though, big red flag. If they're not talking by 2 years old, please talk to your pediatrician, because they're the first person to go to, because the pediatrician will then refer to a speech therapist. So we do have very close relationships with pediatricians as well. And then also, if you're not able to understand everything your child is saying by the time they're 4 to 5 years old, in terms of their speech, how they sound when they're talking, they're still mispronouncing sounds like K or G or T or D. That's definitely another time to talk to your pediatrician and see if they can refer you to a speech therapist. Now, that's not all true for all sounds. Caveat, R is the last developing sound, so a child may not master R till 7 or 8. So typically having a child work on R at 4 or 5, it's usually harder. You can do it if the child can follow what you're showing them to do. But I just want to mention that's the last developing sound. So that's kind of outside the bounds of the 4 to 5 year old range that I'm talking about.
This is great information. I think what's even or better information is that you just mentioned that by age 2, I know some 2-year-olds that talk a lot, and I know some 2-year-olds that also don't talk any at all, maybe a couple of sounds, right? I think this is good to kind of know a good gauge on when you should be alerted, when you need to consult a pediatrician or a speech therapist. So this is awesome. Now, speaking of speech therapists, Meera, you have your own practice. And
yes.
You do a lot of in-home consulting. You're actually a hybrid virtual as well. So I want to talk a little bit about your practice. What inspired you to open up your own practice?
Well, the interesting thing I think to mention is I'm actually not one of those people who had a lifelong dream of opening my own business and practice. So you never know which way things can turn in life. But once COVID, started, of course, now we're all well versed with, when that happened and everything. It really changed, how things were done in terms of speech therapy and, with doctors' visits, all that kind of stuff. And I realized that I was really enjoying working from home. And to be completely honest, because I think that's extremely important, especially for anyone who's listening who happens to be a speech therapist or any other kind of therapist for that matter, I started looking into, okay, so if I went with a company that hired me and I could get a remote position working from home and I could do telehealth, what would that look like? Well, I'm telling you, I'm not willing to accept peanuts. In my opinion, it was peanuts they were wanting to pay me. And I said, wow, I definitely can't go for this. This is way less than I've been making. I'm 14 years into my career, and this is just not going to cut it for me. And so, thankfully, thanks to the encouragement of my brother and sister-in-law, both of them are lawyers. They're amazing people. And they're both in Houston as well. But they both encouraged me to, because they're both partners in their own law firms, respectively, in Houston. They both encouraged me a while back, actually, to start my own business. So it was something that, we had briefly talked about. But I think that was really what got the ball rolling for me. During COVID, you have more time to think. And in my case, it was a good thing. And I started my business actually just last year.
Awesome. Well, we're very excited for you. You always want to have good people in your circle to motivate you and to give you that extra push, especially when needed. So I love the story that you're giving us. Now, I know speech therapists can help a lot of people that have also been affected by a traumatic event. And like you said, your family, your brother and your sister-in-law also are attorneys. In this profession, D. Miller and Associates, we work with a lot of clients that have been in either a car accident, a concussion, traumatic brain injury, even sexual abuse, children, adults, all ages. So let's talk about how your speech therapy can help those that have been affected in some type of a traumatic event.
Okay, so we can work on areas that fall under cognition or thinking in those particular instances. So that might be something like working on using short-term memory aids. Maybe someone has difficulty remembering things now in terms of their short-term memory. So maybe now they need a notebook or they need a planner to help them remember things, to stay organized. Sometimes because we're now all into technology, maybe it's putting appointments on their phone, for example. It sort of depends on the individual client. I mean, I've even worked with clients who have been considering going back to work because they had a more minor brain injury. So I've worked with someone all the way from someone who's had a severe brain injury to where they don't know where they are, to someone who's had a more mild injury in terms of their, thinking about going back to work. And one of the really cool things about one of the jobs I had early on in my career is that we actually worked on community reintegration. So I would actually help drive an 18-passenger van, which that part was hard given. But we would go out into the communities. So we'd go out to places like Galleria. We would go to Starbucks. We'd go to all kinds of cool places. And that was actually my favorite part about that job, seeing how someone who is now different because of their injury, how do they, do everyday things? How can we help them problem solve that?
Yeah, I think that's great because those things can happen at any point of anyone's life. As they are traumatic, they happen very sporadic. So I think that's great that you're able to help that. Now, some of those warning signs, whether they're children or whether they're adults, whether they are delayed in speech or whether they went through something, what are some good warning signs for the loved ones that are with them all the time, whether it's a spouse, whether it's a mother, or even a friend? What are some warning signs that you would want to advise those that are watching that need some type of speech therapy and help?
Sure. So on the child side, similar expressing themselves and they, get really frustrated, for example. I often find that even when children are toddlers, they'll throw stuff and they'll start hitting, but it's a direct result of the fact that they're really struggling to communicate. It's frustrating for them and it's frustrating for their parents or parents and the caregivers. So if you see that, know that speech therapy can really help and know that you will see those behaviors decrease over time. On the adult side, of course, signs of a stroke or brain injury could be something like slurred speech, for example. If you notice that the quality of your loved one, if they're an adult or young adult, older adult, they suddenly start talking in a different way, or you see their mouth is kind of drooping a little bit on one side, those are signs that they need to go to a hospital, and signs that eventually speech therapy could help with that too.
And not just that, with the speech therapy, I know it could be very frustrating for especially not just a kid, but also an adult. So how do you work through some of those frustrations that they're experiencing? They're trying to talk, they've talked their whole life, and now all of a sudden they can't. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, that could be really frustrating. So one of the things that we do, so something that I want to mention that's a term just to explain what it is called aphasia. So aphasia is a loss of language after having a brain injury or stroke. So essentially that means if the left side of your brain, which by the way is the side that's responsible for language, gets affected during a brain injury or stroke, oftentimes the client or individual will have trouble with communicating. So that might look something like, for example, here I have my cell phone. I might be calling this all kinds of other words. I know that I want the phone, but I can't say the word phone. So sometimes what we do in the hospital setting or even in other settings is we might actually give them a picture board. And so a communication board essentially, and that can look many different ways, but it might be something as simple as having a piece of paper and pictures of all the names of family members. So that, instead of requiring them to say it, they could point to the picture. Who do they want? Oh, they can show you. They want their mom, they want their dad, whoever it is. Or if there's simple things, like oftentimes hospitals, especially, but even other places in and outpatient rehab might have a pain scale. They could point to the number, how much pain they're in. Is it 1, very low pain, or 10? Are they in excruciating pain? Or they can point to different, types of faces, like, oh, a sad face, they're having a bad day, happy face, they're having a good day. Or they could point to yes or no, to answer questions. So basically giving them an alternative means of communication and not requiring them to have to respond verbally every time is extremely important.
I think that's a great way that you guys also use the speech therapy and kind of getting creative in other ways of communication. Meera, one of the questions that I was asking was, as a business owner, you've had to pivot, adjust, and restructure within the last year. We all experienced COVID. So tell us a little bit how you were able to transition your practice and what you're doing currently right now to also adjust to that.
So first of all, that's definitely a challenge as a small business owner. And I think anyone who is a small business owner, myself included, understands that that's really difficult. When push came to shove, like you said, when COVID started, we all thought, okay, what on earth are we going to do? So pretty much Zoom became my best friend. And so I, used Zoom as a virtual platform for quite some time, actually. Especially during the shutdown, for those 2 months, that was very crucial. But even for a while after that, I feel like I used it for a while just because, once vaccines started rolling out, still a lot of people weren't vaccinated. So basically all that to say, I did use Zoom for virtual visits. But that has its challenges. I think Zoom is good for older kids and for adults, but I think for younger kids, you can do parent coaching on Zoom, but I think for younger kids, you really kind of need to be there one-to-one because I do a lot of play-based therapy, which is essentially might look like we're blowing bubbles. We might be playing with a puzzle, but we're using those activities to bridge the gap in their language and really build language skills. So like I said, while it's good for certain populations, it's definitely not something that I think works for everyone. I think for kids under the age of really 4 or even 5, it's very difficult to engage them.
The attention deficit too. They have to focus on the screen.
Yes.
The screen, but there's a tool there and there's this one there. So I could see how that could be a little bit challenging as well.
Yeah. But now I'm doing what I like to call hybrid models. So very recently I did start doing in-home visits to the greater Houston area. I do cover a lot of areas in the city and I'm really enjoying that. It's been nice to not only go in people's homes and see what language looks like at home, but also to be able to have that personal connection with the child or with the adult, I think has been really nice. And then also I'm still continuing online visits. And I did want to mention, I do in-home visits in the city of Houston, but because I'm licensed in the state of Texas, I can see anyone online as long as they're in the state of Texas.
Okay. So that's actually a great question that I actually have for you. So you said in the state of Texas, but what if there is a mom that has, their cousin that's in a different state and their child is also in need of some speech therapy? So what obstacles do you have and how can you overcome if you have to help someone in another state?
So the challenging thing about that is it depends on where that person is physically sitting. So because if they're physically sitting in another state, I actually have to go through that state board. So Basically, I have, like we said, I have a license in the entire state of Texas, but each state in all of the 50 United States have a governing body for not only speech language pathologists, which is the same thing as saying speech therapists, but also for audiologists. So we have to be individually licensed in each state. We are hoping that that will change pretty soon. There is something called the Interstate Compact, which is going on right now, and I believe 14 states have signed it, and that is supposed to go into effect sometime in 2022, next year. We are really hoping that Texas joins that. They have not joined at the moment, but essentially, the good thing about that is it means that as a speech therapist, I would not have to get licensed in every state. As long as the state is part of that interstate compact, there are going to be certain regulations. Like I said, I don't know at this time. I will just follow whatever regulations there are. Maybe I pay extra money. Who knows what it'll be? And then, boom, I can see someone who's in Kentucky or in Louisiana or anyone who's part of that interstate compact. So we're hoping that that will really help. I mean, I think one of the biggest struggles right now is, I've talked to people out of state, but unfortunately I can't help them unless I have a license. And it can be frustrating because sometimes, as in any other field, speech therapists specialize in very specific areas. And so sometimes someone in a remote area might not be able to find the exact speech therapy service they're looking for, and it might not even be available in the state they're in.
Wow, that's huge. That's huge. So we want to definitely do our part to try to see how we can help also, not just yourself, but yourself that is also helping others. So we will probably load that in the comment section so that you guys can read a little bit more about your state and what you can do to have the ability to have someone like Meera help you guys out. And now, Meera, I want to ask you a question. So language. My first language is Spanish, right? Could that also be a reason why speech therapy is delayed?
So yeah, I mean, a lot of kids are bilingual or sometimes trilingual, which is super great. I mean, I myself know other languages as well, so I think it's pretty fun also. So definitely children who are in a bilingual or trilingual environment, their language or their speech could be delayed because they're hearing more than one language. However, caveat to that, they can catch up. It just may take them longer to communicate because they're trying to process the 2 or 3 different languages. So sometimes it can look like they're behind, but then once they catch up, boy, they hit the ground running. The other thing I want to mention that is very, very crucial as a speech therapist to think about, or even for other therapists who work with anyone who's bilingual or for that matter trilingual, do not, and I repeat, do not in all caps, tell the person, as in the parent or the adult, for example, that they suddenly need to give up one language. Please don't do that. It's not a service to anyone. It's a big disservice. So I make sure that if I'm working with a bilingual family, or like I said, trilingual family in some cases, you tell them to try to keep the language consistent per person. So for example, maybe mom speaks Spanish, dad speaks English. That's one example. Maybe both parents speak Spanish. Maybe the other siblings speak English. That's also fine. So you can keep the language specific to the individual, or you can use both languages, but you want to avoid what's called code switching within the same sentence. Meaning, if I start the sentence in English, I should be finishing the sentence in English. Or if I start the sentence in Spanish, I should finish the sentence in Spanish. It becomes confusing when I'm starting to mix 2 languages in my repertoire to talk to a child. They may get confused that way.
Wow, you're speaking my language, because for someone that is bilingual, I sometimes think in a different language. I'm communicating in a different language. So when you just said that, I was like, that's me. I've experienced that before. I think that's huge. Now, Meera, tell me a little bit about languages, right? So do you also help with speech therapy on a different language, or you just focus on English itself?
I actually speak other languages, like I mentioned. So I speak Hindi and Gujarati, which are both languages in India. And Hindi I actually learned in high school. Shout out to Bel Air High School. I learned it for 4 years locally in Houston, which, by the way, is the only high school in the entire United States, as far as I know, that teaches Hindi. And Gujarati I actually learned. It's a little bit similar to Hindi, but I learned at home thanks to my amazing parents, who I love very much.
Nice. So I think that's a great attribute, too, that you can bring. So do you also, if they speak those languages, do a little bit of speech therapy and kind of
I
go back
do.
and forth if needed. Wow, that's awesome.
I do. There's actually a child I'm working with right now. Obviously, I cannot disclose a lot of information due to HIPAA, but this is a child I work with in Gujarati and English, so it's pretty fun, and she's actually been responding to me in both languages.
That's awesome. That is great to hear because, like you said, you're not knocking a language. You are keeping them, but you're also being consistent on staying in that path of whatever language it is. So I think that's awesome. So if someone's watching right now and is wanting to get your information or how to reach out to you or want your help like tomorrow, right? Tell us a
Yes.
little bit about how to contact you.
Sure. So you can contact me many different ways, but you can call me 713-364-4398. You can also send me an email, which I check pretty often as well. It's my first name, Meera, Meera, at superspeechsolutions.com. You're also welcome to send me a message on my Facebook business page, which has a lot of great information. I post on it every week, sometimes more than once a week. And that is Super Speech Solutions LLC. I also have an Instagram account that is also Super Speech Solutions. My website is superspeechsolutions.com. So now you have many different ways to reach me.
There's so many ways. Look, there's no excuse. And you just mentioned your Facebook and your Instagram. And, with COVID, I'm sure you had to get very creative on how to reach out to an audience.
Yes.
So you do have a lot of great things on there. You do post online, and you have a lot of things that can even help parents. So talk to us a little bit about your social media and how it just becomes an educational platform.
So first of all, I just want to mention that I did a blog post just promoting this interview today. So that's an example of how I'm using my blog to tie in with social media. But to answer your question, one of the biggest things that I've been working on now for a couple of weeks is coming out with video content that directly talks about how a parent can help their child build language skills during everyday routines. I repeat, everyday routines. And yes, if you go to my Super Speech Solutions LLC page on Facebook itself, you will find, if you look under the video section, there's a video in which I talk about how parents can work on language while they're playing video games with their child. So for all the dads and men that are listening, oh, I know you're all over that one. But the other thing that I'm starting next week, so I'm giving you a little intro here, hasn't happened yet, is every Tuesday I will be posting something called Therapy Tip Tuesday. So that is going to be a tip for parents and sometimes for speech therapists as well as to how you can help a child build speech or language skills. So like I said, the biggest take-home message I want to give parents, or one of them anyhow, is essentially you can work on all the skills I'm working on with your child or any speech therapist is working on with your child, but you don't have to take separate time out of what you're doing during the day. You can do it during mealtime. You can do it while they're taking a bath. You can play a game and make it fun. So it doesn't have to be a structured time.
Yeah, I was mentioning parenting is 24/7. So you are totally right. It's getting creative on how to have that time. So, we're coming close to the end of the show, and I do have two very important questions. Meera, what you do, I could see the energy coming out and how you really enjoy it. But I do want to ask you, what is your favorite thing about your career that you actually get to do every day, day in and day out?
Well, to me, the fact that I get to help people is really huge. I love seeing progress. I love feeling like I'm someone who's able to help instill confidence, not only in children, but in adults too. And to me, there's nothing that means more than that.
Yeah, no, I think that's huge. And look, I think you're doing amazing things for our community, for our people that are in need of speech therapy. I think this is a super awesome. So, one of the last questions that I like to ask all our guests that come onto the show is, some advice that you would give those who are listening, whether they're parents, whether they're our loved ones, someone who is actually suffering from this and they're thinking, hey, I do that. I probably need to seek a little bit of the speech therapy. If you had to give advice to them that are listening, what type of advice would you give them?
So there are a couple of things I would say, but number one, I understand that it's not easy to realize that your child or as an adult, you need to see a specialist. That's a difficult process. It's understanding that there's a problem and admitting that there's a problem. And that can be a very difficult process. And for some people, that's a short process. For some people, that's a longer process. So take as much time as you need, but as soon as you can reach out to a speech therapist, the better off that you're going, that is going to go for your child. Or like I said, if we're talking about an adult here, earlier intervention is key because you can build those skills up sooner rather than later. So like I said, it's an individual process. I know it's really tough for adults and for parents, and for children as well too. But definitely there are those of us out there like myself who really love what we do, and you'll be happy you reached out.
Look, and we are super excited to meet someone like you that loves what you do. I could tell that you love what you're doing and you take pride in your job as well. So, Meera, I am super thankful to have you on the show. Thank you for being also patient with the technical difficulties. And I want to thank you for being on here, being transparent, and allowing people to just dive in a little bit deeper on what you do every single day. So thank you for being on today's show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, it's a pleasure. And for those of you guys that are tuning in, speech therapy is something important for different people, right? Whether it's younger children or adults as well. Speech therapy, whenever it is detected and whenever you see the warning signs, it is recommended that you go out to your pediatrician, your doctor, so that you can also get the help that is needed to make your speech therapy a more successful one in life with whatever life-changing event that you're experiencing. So I want to thank all of you guys for tuning into the show. It's been great. I want to thank you guys for liking the show, but most importantly, I want to thank you guys for sharing it. The more you share, the more we get to educate those that are out there, and we can help someone that's in need, whether it's an individual, a spouse, a parent, or anyone that knows of someone that's in need of a speech therapist. So I want to thank you guys for tuning in to Talk to Me Tuesday on a Tuesday. I'm your host, Madi B. Until next time.